Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Raising Talks session. Our guest today is from New York, but he actually comes from Serbia. So Vladimir Vukićević is a serial entrepreneur, an investor, and currently the CEO and co-founder of Better and Better. And he will also generally give us an overview of the American market, which I think will be very important for Serbian startups trying to expand to the United States. Vlad, this is the nickname Vladimirs usually get in the United States. Mm-hmm. Thank you for joining us in this Raising Talk sessions with successful entrepreneurs that is organized by Science and Technology Park Belgrade within the Raising Starts program aimed at very early stage startups. Then it's being done with the support of government of Switzerland.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
And my name is Katarina Popović. I am a public speaking coach and a co-founder of Pitch Consultancy. I will be moderating this conversation in front of the Science and Technology Park today. So I believe we have so many interesting things to cover. And let's start with Better and Better. So your startup is playing in some very interesting niche markets. The products you are giving us are both good for our health in an innovative way, and they're also good for the planet. So can you give us a little overview on how did you position yourself and how this idea came about?
Yeah, so the big idea for Better and Better is that existing habits are much more powerful and useful than new habits potentially. So the idea for our company is to use existing habits and to make them better, to make them more useful, to make them more impactful on our health, and to make them in a way more valuable to us as well. And so one of the most universal existing habits is brushing your teeth. Most people brush their teeth at least once or twice a day. And it's a habit that is pretty universal, whether it's in Europe, United States, anywhere in the world mainly. So our first product is a 2-in-1 toothpaste. So a toothpaste that is clean, organic, but cleans your teeth in the same way that a Crest or a Colgate or any of the big toothpaste brands do. But in addition to cleaning your teeth, it gives you a microdose of different vitamins and nutrients. So the first variety of our toothpaste has vitamin B12 and vitamin D, which are the two most lacking vitamins in the United States, but also in the world as well. And that's why we chose to focus on it. But over time, we plan on rolling out kind of a horizontal expansion to have different types of toothpaste so that we will have an immunity toothpaste with vitamin C and with zinc in it. We will have a calming toothpaste that is for before going to bed, kind of calms your mouth and your body. And so we will develop different types of toothpaste, but we'll also grow vertically. So we will have different solutions. So we're developing a mouth spray that when you can't brush your teeth, it freshens your breath, but also gives you a dose of vitamins. We will have skin cream, lip balm, shampoos, anything that touches your skin and that is already an existing habit can be a delivery mechanism for our company. So that's where we're going with Better and Better.
This is really interesting because the inner workings of our mouth, as far as I know, is like, well, it's very absorbent, the atmosphere inside. So this is a very interesting way of actually getting more vitamins by doing what you already do.
Exactly. It's through sublingual and transbuccal. So the buccal is the cheeks and sublingual is under the tongue. So you don't have to swallow anything. It's just regular brushing, spit out, and then you're done.
How did you come about? How did you say, okay, I'm just going to do this with a toothpaste?
Yeah. So it's a long story actually. So
give us a glimpse.
Yeah, yes. A glimpse. Yeah. So yes. I went to the United States when I was a child, when I was 5 years old, almost 6 years old, for medical reasons. So I was diagnosed with bone cancer. So I had to go for treatment to the United States. So I've had health and wellness part of my life for ever since I can remember. A very long time. And I was successfully treated. It took 5 or 6 years, and I've been in remission for 20 plus years. But there are some long-term effects from cancer treatment, from the chemotherapy and the radiation. And one of those effects is mineral and vitamin deficiencies. So I've been taking vitamin D and other vitamins and nutrients for many years now. And the pills for vitamin D in particular are pretty challenging on my stomach. So they upset my stomach, and I have a tough time remembering to take them. So even during my previous startup, which we'll talk about, I started playing around, experimenting a little bit in my own kitchen, trying to come up with different sprays and delivery mechanisms. And I saw that a toothpaste could actually be a very powerful delivery mechanism for this kind of absorption. So it really came from personal need and my own personal, in a way, laziness to take pills. So, as many entrepreneurial ideas, it came from kind of my own problems.
Right.
Yeah.
But this is just great. Some people get discouraged when somebody says, oh, everything is already done or everything has already been said. But then you take a toothpaste that is like the most common thing, right? Ever. Right. And then you go, okay, this can be done better.
That's right.
So
That's right.
Great idea. I'm really glad that you're fine for a long time and that you're actually, improving lives of others.
Yes.
That's a great mission.
Yeah.
Let's go to the American market.
Sure.
So since you are successfully playing there, this is your third startup.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us a little overview of the American market? I mean, the market is gigantic, so there's no such thing as a little overview, but some segments, some sub-markets, some things that we should know as entrepreneurs going for the USA.
Yeah, I think there are definitely differences from a geographic perspective, first and foremost. So I'm based in New York. I'm very familiar with New York. I think in particular, there are 3 or 4 different sectors that have started to emerge from a startup community in New York. The first is kind of media and television, because CNN, Fox News, a bunch of different TV stations are based in New York. So there are a lot of media startups that start in that city. The next is kind of fashion and in general consumer products, which better and better my company would fit into, because we make toothpaste, we make personal health care products. Those would fit into kind of the consumer bucket. And then financial services and general banking is very popular in New York because of all the banks that are based Wall Street and beyond in the New York area. I think if you go a little bit further north, there's Boston. Boston is a little bit more biotech and medical technology, because there are a lot of medical institutions in Boston that are giving money to startups, investing in startups in a new and unique way. But the two markets are connected, New York and Boston. Then if you go to the West Coast, there is Northern California, which is San Francisco, San Jose, a bunch of those cities, Silicon Valley. That's very heavy tech, AI, robotics, some crypto, and more traditional social media. But now they've kind of grown away from social media in a way more towards hard tech. If you go to Southern California, Los Angeles, San Diego, those are more television, TV, Hollywood, companies that are creating content and distributing content want to be based in Los Angeles. And then also companies that support that. So people who anyone who works with celebrities probably wants to be in Southern California. And then you have all the Southern United States. So starting with Texas, but then going down to Florida, those are probably some of the fastest emerging areas for technology and for startups in the United States, because the cost of living is lower. You can hire engineers for slightly reduced cost compared to the East Coast or the West Coast. And there's a lot of emerging technology there connected globally, because Florida is very connected to Latin America and to South America. So all the markets within the United States are very different. And in addition to geographic, I would also say they're different in terms of where you would go depending on stage. So if you're really looking for angel investors, very early stage first investors, I think New York and San Francisco are really good for that. But if you want a little bit later stage, Los Angeles, Texas, Florida are maybe series A, B, C, kind of as your company begins to grow a little bit larger.
Yeah, we had that joke that as your company grows and you earn more money, you start moving to the woods or to the mountains or to nature.
Yes, you want to be away from technology.
Yes, you all of a sudden you want to become rural.
That's right.
You also mentioned the amount of people that are actually not living in the cities, and that's a very important part of information for a startup coming there. So could you?
Yes, that's right. That? When you think U.S., you think cities, but what I found is that a large percentage of the population, probably most people at this still, live in the suburbs and in the rural areas outside of cities. So in New York, you have New York City, but you have Long Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, even Philadelphia in a way is an extension of New York City. That's where there's a lot of power and consumer spending. A lot of my early investors, my angel investors that I've met, weren't people living in the city. They already were, wealthy individuals who had moved outside of the city, kind of what you were saying. They moved outside of the city and they want to participate in the startup ecosystem, but they don't necessarily have the capability to be in the city. So you have to get to them outside of the cities itself.
Yes. So I'm guessing an important piece of advice for a startup that wants to expand to the US is to go there first and maybe travel around a bit to get to that feeling of how people live their lives. Like, how is this, buying and spending and interests, how are they going, and how will they find their customers?
That's right. Customers, investors, partners, suppliers. Yes. It's a very large geographic country. So I think the easiest way to make connections is through other people, is through networks. It's through connections. It's through people saying you should go to this little town, 2 hours north of New York. This little town is known for semiconductor prototyping or something like that. So it's very hard to know from a kind of global perspective. It's much more easier kind of from a bottom up. Where are the human connections that I could make for connecting with the right people?
I think this is the first advice that we're going to single out for our entrepreneurs. The thing you just said, because cold emailing from another continent sounds very, great, but it's not going to happen.
No.
So my guess is to you probably say this better, but this culture of connecting and networking, this is what Silicon Valley is known for. But I'm guessing New York is no different.
Absolutely.
When I had a startup, the best and the fastest working connections were literally what you just said. You have to know the right people and ask them for help.
That's absolutely 100% right. It's very difficult, even if you're just 100% American with an American name, who came from Harvard or Yale, or any of the premier institutions. Even those types of people have extreme challenges with cold emails or LinkedIn messages or more Twitter direct messages or anything like that. Particularly people who are investors or other entrepreneurs who are successful, they get bombarded with information. So having any sort of warm intro, any sort of a friend of a friend of a friend, or anything like that is quite useful and quite valuable. The idea of pekoveze here, it's almost seen as something negative, but I think in the US, a warm introduction goes much further than anything else. I would say at least 10 to 1, maybe even 100 to 1 better likelihood of someone responding and communicating.
Mm-hmm. This leads us to another question, and that is the nature of startup community in the United States. I think you just opened that box with this talk about warm intros, but could you talk about that too a little bit? Like how would people from Serbia go about getting to know people in the United States?
Absolutely. So I think there are different organizations that are starting to develop now. One of the primary ones that I've used kind of in both directions is the Serbian Entrepreneurs Network. started in the United States, but is now a global network of Serbian entrepreneurs started by Tihomir Bajic in the United States. And just that network, is a few hundred people, but those few hundred people have access to thousands or tens of thousands of individuals. So I think it's really important to note that you don't need to know everyone and everything to be successful in terms of making connections. It's really important just to know one or two people that know you maybe, or that trust you, or build a connection with someone who will know you and trust you, and then leverage that connection for broader introductions, connections, and beyond. I think there's some incubators and accelerators that are useful in terms of knowing and learning about multiple individuals. So there's Techstars Incubator, which has multiple locations. There's Y Combinator in San Francisco. There's the Entrepreneurs Roundtable Accelerator, ERA. It's actually run by a Turkish individual. So immigrants rule the world in some ways, particularly in the United States. So it's okay to be from somewhere else, but you still have to have some sort of warm connection, some sort of warm introduction to be taken more seriously.
This is a great intro to my next question. And that is, say I got introduced to a person from the industry that my startup is at. Mm-hmm. Could you give me and our listeners a little hint about how would you go about pitching your startup? Like, what would be the advice on how to focus on the most important things that you're going to say in like 5 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, there's the old saying in Silicon Valley, if you want money, ask for advice. And if you want advice, ask for money. Because I think, and that goes down to the fundamental idea of people want to first connect with you. They want to create some sort of bridge of understanding before they would even contemplate giving you money or giving you their portfolio of their network, which in some ways could be even more valuable than money. So I think my primary goal whenever I'm speaking with someone new is to get them to first know me, know my story, know how I've gotten where I've gotten, what I'm doing, why I'm building what I'm building. Mm-hmm. And I do that, relatively quickly, 3 to 10 minutes, depending on how much time I have. And then after they know me, it opens up the pitch towards what I'm doing with my company, where our company is going. So I think it's fundamentally important to say who you are, what you're doing, why you're doing what you're doing, and then go into a pitch about what the company is, what the market opportunity is, what the more traditional business side of things. Because in some ways that's interesting, but not necessarily unique. It's you as an individual who are always unique. There's no one else like you. So you want to make that narrative as clear and as kind of compelling as possible.
Thank you for this pitching finesse, because this is one of those things that entrepreneurs usually skip over. They start talking about their product, market, and then all of a sudden you become the selling machine that nobody wants to listen to. So this is very, very nicely put. To say things differently, start from a different point.
Right. Fundamentally, we're all human beings, right? And I think it's that human connection that, particularly during these last 2 years, everyone's missing. The COVID bubble that we're in, it's starting to break now, but it's that human connection that often is what opens the door toward a business connection.
Yes, this is really important. We lose sight of that when we're deep in our business models and our different problems, and then you lose sight of the fact that human connection is what creates what opens the doors.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a relatively difficult question, and that is, say if you had a startup in Serbia, mm-hmm. and you wanted to go to the United States. What would be like 5 steps that you would take to get from, point A to point B?
So I think step number 1 to connecting with the United States broadly is to find your human. Connect with someone that either is there or has been there or is connected to other people there. Because, like I said, that warm human interaction can lead to a lot of openings within the networking world. It's okay if it's your cousin, or if it's your uncle, or if it's your, someone you once knew in high school or middle school. But a human connection goes a long way. And step 2 would be not to ask for something from the beginning, but to be more open about just a dialogue, a conversation, saying what you're doing without asking for a favor or without asking for some sort of thing in return. Because I think people kind of shut down when they think someone's going to ask them for something. But if it's someone catching up or chatting with you about your idea or your startup or what you're doing in life, I think it's much easier to open up a conversation and dialogue with someone if you're just giving them an update, as opposed to starting the conversation off with an ask. It's more of, let me give you something before I ask for something in terms of conversations. And then step 3, I think it's important to think about anything from a global perspective, especially if you want to go to the United States for fundraising or for customers or beyond. So I think from the beginning, very early beginnings of any idea or startup or concept, having a roadmap that goes beyond just Serbia in your mind should always be in the back of it, because that will come up with that first human connection. It'll come up with the second human connection, and it will definitely come up when you're talking to actual real customers or investors or partners in the United States, because no one wants to think about companies that are just purely based on Serbia or even just the Balkans, but generally it's more likely to be successful. You're more likely to be successful if you position yourself as a global, right, at least from a global perspective.
So we can use these 3 steps, right?
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And the 4th step, I guess, would be opening the company in the United States. But
yes,
that's a big question. Like, is that necessary or not? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's more of a legal question, so it depends. But from my experience, I think that there are certain types of companies that probably should have a Delaware, C Corp establishment in the United States. Those are companies that are oriented more towards physical products or digital products that will in some way be sold in the United States or in some way be offered to customers in the United States clearly. Whereas, like, I think new products such as crypto tokens or NFTs or anything in the more decentralized world, Web3 products, I think those are almost now being understood to be as more global by definition. And so investment in Web3 companies, Web3 products, it's okay to not necessarily have at least a US-based entity to start. Maybe you will need one down the line, but I think newer kind of decentralized technologies are okay to be purely Serbia-based. Whereas I think if it's a more consumer-oriented product, then it's a US entity makes more sense.
Also, in an interesting turn of events, your company raised money from Serbian entrepreneurs while being a New York company.
Right.
So this is very, very interesting for our startups here. Can you tell us how that happened and why?
Yeah, so it happened mainly through the as I mentioned, the Serbian Entrepreneur Network. There are a few hundred of those entrepreneurs in the United States alone, and I've been connected to that network for 4 or 5 years now. I was first connected through my previous company. My company Mural had a couple of smaller angel investors from the Serbian entrepreneurs, more like friends and family. But then when I started my third company, which is Better and Better, which is my current company, that those dialogues grew into more of, well, we want to have a bigger stake. We want to have a bigger position in this company. And it's that little nucleus of people in New York that started connecting me to entrepreneurs and business people and companies here in Serbia as well. And so it all networked out of 2 or 3 people into tens, if not hundreds of people and companies that are involved in helping us and supporting us. So yes, it was kind of reverse, but in a way that could lead to more Serbian integration. Like, for instance, we're exploring establishing some sort of research and development extension of our company here in Belgrade. That's partially why I'm here, is talking to different scientists and engineers about, well, what could we do here in terms of helping develop and test new products that could be launched elsewhere around the world. So in some ways, my story is a little bit reversed, but it's quite unique and powerful.
That's very important, because usually you would think that you need to go outside to get investment.
Yeah.
But now what you're saying, this is also interesting. You can look around.
Absolutely.
And also with your, if you have like this global idea, you can start from your own backyard.
Most of my early investors in all the companies that I've started were not necessarily first degree connections. So it wasn't my friend or my uncle or my business partner or colleague, but it was their friend, their uncle, their business colleague. So it was always usually the second degree connection that had been the most fruitful for me in terms of investors and partners and beyond, because there's enough trust already established, but there isn't any sort of personal baggage.
Right.
There's trust without being too personal.
Yeah, without knowing too much about the other person.
That's right. Yeah.
One also important thing that we talked about in our preparatory talks was this interesting thing about the American culture, the way it treats failure. And why is that important for entrepreneurs coming from Europe? Because Europe is a bit different in treating failure. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I think failure in many ways is completely accepted and in some ways embedded within the system of startups, entrepreneurship, and beyond. It starts from the beginning. So even in college and in early career, people switch between different companies much faster. They explore different opportunities, and often that comes because they were in companies that failed, or they were in companies that were downsizing or firing people or closing a particular product line. That's all normal. There's no shame or there's no negativity. So generally, there's no shame or negativity associated with that. So it starts early and then it starts to go from there. So for instance, most investors, even individual angel investors, know that most of their investments are going to go to zero. They're not going to be big returns. They're going to be nothing because the companies are trying to go for something big and something new. It's accepted that some of them, or many of them, or most of them will fail, because 1 out of 10 will be that big one, will be the one that gives 10x or even 100x or 1,000x return on investment. So it's embedded within the expectation of investors. So that means it's embedded within the expectation of entrepreneurs. And so if you fail, if your company fails, if you raise money and you failed, you didn't wrong anyone, you didn't hurt anyone. You experienced something, you tried for something big, and it didn't work. You learned, you move on, you start something new. That is how the system works.
We gave that jump in perception a name. We called it the what's next culture.
That's right.
That's very liberating. And all of a sudden you can just pile up your failures and, learn from them. And
absolutely. Yeah.
Jump to something bigger. Like if you fail, it means you tried and you learned something. So this is also important for Serbian entrepreneurs. I know this was my lesson, but it's important to talk about what you learned and how you're going to do things better.
Yeah, and I think the idea of risk is really big, because within risk, there is higher likelihood of failure. But if you succeed, there's a higher kind of ceiling to what the success can be. And I think most investors, at least from the angel up to venture capital, want high risk, high reward companies. They almost don't want to look at companies that can't fail. because if it can't fail, it means you're not thinking big enough.
Mm-hmm. You're building a lifestyle business. If
you're building a lifestyle
fail.
business, you're building a nice business, but it's not something an angel investor or venture capitalist would necessarily be interested in.
This is leading us to another question, because you're also actively investing in startups. So I wanted to ask you, is there a niche or an industry you're specifically interested in, or how do you choose your startups?
Yeah, it's
what are
funny.
You looking for?
All the same things that I discussed happened to me from when I put my investor hat on. It's mainly warm introductions through people I know and people I trust who say, hey, talk to Branko or talk to Diana or talk to someone that I'm working with, because you could be able to be helpful to them potentially financially or individually as an advisor or a supporter in some way. So it's predominantly warm introductions. And generally, because I'm not a big investor, still very early, I look for ideas very early on. So, even in many cases, pre-product, pre-launch, where there's a good team thinking about a big problem and looking to solve that big problem in a unique and innovative way. That's where I'm the most interested, not necessarily after, the market's been proven and the valuation of the company is already higher. I'd rather put a little bit of money in something very high risk, high reward with a good team than with, something that's even maybe been somewhat proven, but it's much higher priced and the return is lower, because that's just not that interesting to me. To me, what's most interesting is like the really early stage, high leverage opportunities. But any sector, broadly any category, as long as, like you said, it's not a lifestyle business, as long as it has that venture capital potential return of $100 million plus in terms of exit, in terms of acquisition or IPO or some sort of end to the company itself.
Yeah, this is great advice for entrepreneurs to look at their startups from a point of an investor, not just from a point of a founder.
Yeah, cold pitches or cold emails, I have to say, unfortunately, I delete most of them just because if I didn't, I would go crazy. Because my email and my contact information, LinkedIn, is very easy to connect with me, but to actually, have a deeper conversation, the person needs to put in a little bit of work potentially to get to the next level, to get to the next conversation.
Now you just made me realize on another level why these conversations are important, because people who should know you get to hear you first and then connect with you. So it's already a semi-warm.
Sure.
Through Raising Starts could be a semi-warm introduction. Maybe you can help some of the startups in Serbia.
Absolutely. And I'm in Serbia now more and more. So I think the startup community here, just in the last 5 years, it's night and day. It's like, it's incredible, the stuff that's happened with the Science Technology Park, with some of the new initiatives, the Catapult, some of the other accelerators and incubators, and even venture capital, more and more venture capital firms. I think it's, maybe this is a bit of a controversial topic, but in some ways, it might be better to be a globally minded entrepreneur in Belgrade or Serbia in general, or the Balkans in general, than in the US, because the curve here in some ways is much sharper now, because there's so much change, there's so much new capital, there's so many new people coming in, that riding that wave could be more advantageous than trying to compete with thousands of other people in New York. It's less
crowded, right?
That's right. It's less crowded, and it's the ground is more fertile for picking up for fruit and winning in some way here.
Yes, this is great motivation.
Yeah, I mean, the excitement here feels like New York 10 years ago or San Francisco 20 years ago in terms of startup activity, collaboration. I think people are a lot more willing here now to talk to each other and to share which I think is a somewhat of a new concept because holding everything close, there are some advantages to that, but I think it's much more advantageous to be open than it is to be closed off.
Yeah, networking never happens in when you're sitting in your room.
That's right. Unless it's Zoom.
Unless it's Zoom, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, then again, we got introduced to, the
That's
whole
right.
thing happened, right?
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask you about some details that entrepreneurs should keep in mind when expanding to the US. Things like, legal stuff, patents, data privacy laws, things that are different than in Serbia, but also important, like, in which stage of your startup you should not be talking to media because your patent is not ready yet,
right?
And stuff like that. Do you have any experience with that?
Yeah, I think generally, so let's start with media and all that. I think pre-launch, I generally find it to be a waste to try to pitch media and because most media that I've had in the end serves the purpose of either selling the product or selling the company to the world in some way. And so pre-launch, I think, is very early unless you're really using media to attract investors. So using it as an investor, but then you're still selling, selling something, you're selling equity, you're selling yourself. So I think the media generally after product launch is a good idea. I think legal, there are many, many law firms in the United States. So it's important to know who's who and what's what. Some of the big law firms may be well known, but they're not very good with startup formation, startup law, global startup intricacies and maneuvers. So I think finding a law firm or a group of lawyers that are startup friendly is really, really important. Otherwise, you can spend a lot of money with a big law firm that isn't even that well experienced, in startup law and startup experiences. We mentioned Delaware C Corp, like that's the most common legal entity. So it's a type of corporation. It's called a C corporation, the letter C. And Delaware is a state within the United States that is the most friendly in terms of corporations for protecting corporations from lawsuits and other claims that could be negative. So that's why most companies incorporate in Delaware as a C corp, because then they can accept investor money from U.S. investors. And I think that's important to note that a lot of U.S. investors will not invest in international entities. So some will, particularly what I mentioned before around crypto and decentralized platforms. But if it's anything a little bit more traditional and centralized, then investors generally do want to see a U.S. entity as potentially the holding company or as the entity that they're investing in. And then, what else? I think that the U.S. now is becoming more and more, as is here in Serbia, a freelance culture. So being able to work with freelance individuals in some ways often can be better than working with big companies and big firms. So designers, media individuals, marketers, freelancers, individuals are gaining more and more prominence and power in the United States. So again, through networking, asking other entrepreneurs, who have you worked with that was really good for you in terms of copywriting in English, or who was really good for you in terms of digital marketing in the United States. It could be, Bob in Florida, who's really good at setting up an Amazon sales page. So I think networking goes a long way, not just for finding investors, but also for finding vendors and partners.
Right. What you just mentioned, the C Corp in Delaware. Just wondering, if you are not an American citizen, could you be a company founder if you're not an American citizen? It's an important piece of information.
As far as I know, yes, you can. That you don't need to be a U.S. citizen to have a company in the United States.
Do you need to appear in person, or you can all do
it? I've never been to Delaware, so you don't.
I have, but for different reasons.
Right. It's there's a whole network of law firms and legal entities that make it, click a button and you have a Delaware C corp. It's a little more complex than that.
Yeah, of course.
But it's pretty surprisingly easy to set up a Delaware C corp. So with a little bit of Google research, you could do it within a few weeks.
That's great. That makes things a lot easier, even thinking about them.
Yeah.
Tell me, we usually ask our dialogue partners here in our talks to tell us 3 advices for startups. I mean, you already gave a lot of advice.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be 3. It can be any number.
Sure.
But what are the most valuable things that you learned along the way?
One is just having a short memory.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
Yeah. A lot of bad stuff happens all the time. And sometimes more bad than good. So being able to kind of dust off, okay, next. It's similar like what's next, but it's like an internal what's next. What do I need to do and how do I get there? I will have many challenges and negative experiences along the way, but I think that what I find is a lot of entrepreneurs get overwhelmed. Like, something happened and I have to think about it, and like, no, just move on. Like, what's next? How do you do it? What is your goal, and how do you get to that goal? So it's a very like single-minded mentality, and in some ways, often it's like playing tennis. You just have to hit the ball back. You don't have to have the winning point every time. You just have to stay alive and hit the ball back. And then at certain points, you go for the win. You go for the winning moment, but it's not all the time. You're just staying alive, moving forward, and then bam, you do something good. So that kind of short-term, constant approach, I think, has helped me. I think another thing, and related to that, is the idea of feedback. You will get a lot of feedback from a lot of different people, and oftentimes it will be conflicting. You will get 2 opposite opinions about your company, your idea, from 2 people you might trust and love or respect. So as an entrepreneur, it's very important to be a filter, to not accept everything, to not let everything impact your business, but to kind of collect and filter and take nuggets of feedback. But rarely would I ever like pivot my company
because somebody said so. Yeah.
Right, 180 degrees because someone said so. But there are trends, right? So if you keep getting the same feedback over and over again, well, that's important, because why is that feedback coming over and over again? So that's something to keep an eye on. But it's important to be that filter. And then I think the third part is the idea, and again, all kind of related, is the idea of resilience. Like, you will get 10 no's for every yes, even if you're the smartest, most talented, wonderful entrepreneur in the world. And so just being able to accept that someone says no doesn't necessarily mean you're bad or that your company is bad, but just there's not the right overlap at the right moment of in that time, and then you move on. I think that's really, really key, and that's really important. So all these things are related, like short memory, resilience. They
actually form a nice, kind of like a nice winning circle. It goes probably upwards like this.
That's right, like a spiral or something like that. Yeah.
Going upwards.
Because it all boils down to being both curious and confident at the same time, which sometimes could be conflicting, but if combined together, it could be quite useful and quite powerful.
Yeah, being confident in yourself when you're doing something new is I guess we need a college for that.
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes it's, for better or for worse, a lot of confidence comes from just acting confident.
Yep.
Whether you're confident or not, you're saying, I'm confident and I will act.
I'm just going to do this.
I'm just going to do this.
Yeah, right.
Because it's very hard to like be really grounded in some true capability or confidence, because a lot of what startups do is they're creating a new reality. You're building something completely new, and it's very, there's no point of reference necessarily. So just being a little more active and proactive in your confidence is important.
I also wanted to ask you to wrap up this conversation. I wanted to ask you, because I find this very, very interesting. For example, when I researched your products, I've noticed that you use terms like vegan, eco-friendly, good for nature, good for planet, and you talk about there is no plastic in the packaging, and these are all very, very important things. Yeah. But what I've noticed is they are growingly or more important in certain cultures or markets, like more than in others.
Sure.
So my question is, how important it is to be in a certain culture or in a certain market for an idea to be born?
Yeah, I think it's important, but shouldn't be overvalued, I think, because I think, what is it, Wayne Gretzky, the hockey player, says, go where the puck is going, not where it is right now. So if you're going for something that is hot and trendy and really popular right now, well, by the time you launch in a year or two, the world might change, your local environment might change, the trends will change. So I think for me, I try to think of the world as, where is the general flow of things? Where is it generally going? And I think you mentioned vegan. I think vegan is in some ways important and key because, meat products and meat resources are taxing on the environment. They're challenging for us physiologically as well in some cases. But I don't I'm not fully vegan. I eat meat, but I eat it within moderation. But knowing where the world is kind of going, I think is important because it has helped shape our product in a meaningful way. But in terms of eco-friendly, I think, at this point, if you're starting a company with any sort of physical impact on the world, which is pretty much every company, even if it's a server in, in Scandinavia that you're using, you're still having an impact in the world. Having to think about the world and the environment is, I think, at this point, pretty broad and universal. There are very few companies that, right? It's a must. There are very few companies who come out and say, we don't give a shit about the world. That's very rare. Because I think we need to protect the world that we live in, and we need to make it better for us to keep living here. And so it needs to be within the DNA of pretty much every company that's created now. And so for us, for Better and Better, one of the reasons we named it Better and Better, it's better for you and better for the planet. It's better for both big parties, you individually and the world. We try to remove plastic from most of our products. Even our toothpaste uses sugarcane packaging as opposed to traditional oil-based, petroleum-based products. So it's embedded in every decision. It's embedded within our DNA so that even when I'm not the CEO in 50 years, that DNA will still be there, hopefully, and will be respected in a way that we're trying to build upon it now.
Yeah, it's a great mission.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and it's a great thinking of 50 years ahead, because when you have a startup, you usually think that it's going to be your company for a long time. But now that you said this, it's very important to think, what happens if I'm not CEO?
Well, both of my previous companies before Better and Better were acquired. So my first company, Rocket Hub, was a crowdfunding platform that was acquired by kind of a global conglomerate of companies called eFactor Group. And eFactor doesn't exist anymore, and Rocket Hub doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. My baby that I worked 4 years to build, and everything I put into it, was active. Then it grew, and then it disappeared. And that's okay. Whereas Mural, which was my second company, where we built a physical product for bringing art and photography to people, so a digital frame that connected to museums and galleries around the world and brought art to people, that's growing. So that was acquired by a company called Netgear. Netgear is a publicly traded company. They're on the NASDAQ. They have billions of dollars, and they're growing Mural And Muriel is like almost my child that grew up and moved out and lives on its own, and I get to see from afar, but I don't control in any way anymore. And then for better and better, I mean, we're building better and better for the long term. We're trying to build a company that can exist in 100 years or 200 years. And so that's why I think I'm taking a little bit more slowly with better and better, taking it a little bit more step by step. It doesn't need to be everything all at once. It just needs to be really good right now at what it's doing, and then kind of build on that. And if we do that, then maybe I'll be CEO in 50 years, and maybe I won't, but at least the company will be in existence and hopefully growing and thriving in making some sort of new biotech product that changes our intelligence levels through brushing our teeth. We'll see.
Right. Yeah, that would be very interesting.
Will be. Yeah. Go for a test. You just brush your teeth and you're good.
You just eat up all the knowledge.
That's right. Eat up all the knowledge.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, well, I think I wish we had more time, because this is really, really interesting.
We'll talk again.
Definitely. We should do a part 2.
Yes.
So thank you for your time that you spent with us and with Science and Technology Park team. And for more entrepreneurial wisdom and interesting entrepreneurship stories, please follow Raising Starts and all the links will be displayed on the screen. And I will also ask you if you want to share your contact, but we'll make sure to make a warm intro, as you said. But if you're willing to share your contact, we'll also add it to other links.
Yeah. Vlad at betterandbetter.com. Okay,
great.
That's my email. And, if I respond, I respond. If I don't, I do my best to respond.
If you don't respond, they need to warm up the intro.
They need to try again. That's right. Yeah. So, it's not an insult. It's just a reality.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Short-term memory. What's next? So for all who are, listening and watching, thank you. And we'll see you again in May with more interesting stories from successful entrepreneurs. Bye-bye.